Last year, I think it was easier to notice at least one ICO project taking off. But today, nowadays, it's a lot harder to identify a successful ICO project. That's why many of you would say, okay, ICOs are dead. But it seems that there's a new model in town, which seems to work better. But more about this is going to talk our next speaker, André Guedel, KPMG crypto economist, head of International Headquarters Cluster. Welcome on stage, and please fascinate us.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Great. My name is André Guedel. I'm an economist working for KPMG in Switzerland. And you may have heard that Switzerland has emerged as one of the leading locations for crypto crowdfunding. First of all, I'd like to thank you, the organizers here, for having me, for giving me the stage, and giving me the possibility to talk about ICOs and the future of ICOs and how crypto crowdfunding can survive in the future. I just came back from the Singapore Financial FinTech Festival, which took place last week in Singapore. And I can tell you, if everybody's in doubt about the interest in cryptocurrencies and crowdfunding, there is no question, at least in Asia, that this is in high demand and that there's a strong interest in everything related to cryptocurrencies, crowdfunding, tokenizations of assets. One thing which is similar to this event here, it's the energy. Asia, there's a lot of people, especially young people, launching themselves into fintech, cryptocurrencies, and I feel the same energy here when I come to Bucharest, to Romania. I see quite a dynamic crowd, people who want to do something new, people who want to use the blockchain technology and the tokenizing of assets as a possibility to run businesses, to grow business, to finance businesses. Now, I will talk about three things here. First of all, I will give you a quick overview about the market condition, the current market condition for initial coin offerings. Next to that, I will show what our clients are doing if they're looking for an alternative for ICOs. And next, I will talk about the hybrid token equity financing. We at KPMG, we started about 18 months ago with support for crypto crowdfunding. We had a lot of clients, a lot of client interest towards the end of last year, early this year, of companies which saw this enormous amount of money which have been raised. Tezos is a good example, Filecoin is a good example, Bancor, all companies which raised within a very short time period a lot of money, and they wanted to follow these examples. So we started with supporting these companies with legal, tax, and regular advice out of Switzerland. Why Switzerland has become such an attractive location? Because of a regulatory organization which is in favor of crypto crowdfunding. The Swiss government supports crypto crowdfunding. Banks which are actually supporting or actually at least working with ICO companies, and then finally also a tax system which is highly attractive. Now, when we look at crowdfunding, first, what are the traditional means of funding a venture or a project? It's angel money, venture capital money. It's very well known. This can lead to initial public offering, which is also a very well known and well used track to raise funds. There's this debt financing which is used for some types of operations, and then finally is also royalty financing which is quite often used in the life science sector. Here comes crypto crowdfunding. It is fast, it is inexpensive, and at least nowadays it's still slightly regulated. And that's what makes the popularity of this financing possibility. Now, how does it look nowadays? in a certain way, crypto crowdfunding has been a success story. If you look at this chart here, we look at the difference between angel financing and crypto crowdfunding, and you see that in the mid of 2017, there was already more crypto crowdfunding. Well, they started to have crypto crowdfunding, and by the end of last year, there were more companies using crypto crowdfunding to financing the project than they would go to angel money and seed money. And in the early months of this year, there was even a bigger difference. However, if you look at the larger scale, we have to notice that crypto crowdfunding or issuing of tokens, mainly utility tokens, is comparatively very small to venture capital financing in total. These are the charts, the recent charts about crypto crowdfunding, and what we see is a clear sign of a massive decline. We saw a peak around December, January of earlier this year, where a massive numbers of projects have been financed, and now we see a strong decline. The last month, September, these are the figures of Bloomberg, there are only around 300 million which have been raised through a crypto crowdfunding. Now, one word to those figures. They are not 100% waterproof. Why? Because we don't know exactly where everywhere in this world ICOs are taking place. We don't know how many ICOs only reach the stage of a private placement. These are the latest figures from Q3. What we see here, 1.8 billion have been raised in funds via crypto crowdfunding, via the release of a token. The total numbers of projects around 600, but only about half of it, only about 250, have been able to raise more than 100,000 US dollars, which is definitely not a big success, because an ICO currently costs at least 200,000 euros. If done properly and following the laws. Only 24 of these ICOs in the Q3 have managed to be listed on exchange, which is actually essential for crypto token buyers to get out of the project and to generate liquidity. However, and that's positive news, out of the 20 largest ICOs in Q3, they were all able to raise between 20 and 70 million, which is still substantial. In average, they raised around 33 million per ICO. I'm talking about the 20 largest ICO. So there is still possibilities. There are still possibilities to raise funds via an ICO. Now, as I said, we have many clients which have launched ICOs, and we are currently working with around a dozen of clients which are considering to launch an ICO or to look for alternatives. And the experiences are quite interesting. Some of the clients are coming back to us because they feel we have now seen the bottom of the market, and they are ready now to launch their cryptocurrency. Others, they are looking for alternative possibilities, and third, they gave up the project all in all. Now, before I go into the description of the projects, a few words to the tokens, how they are actually assessed in Switzerland by the Swiss Financial Market Regulator, the FINMA. We have 3 different types of tokens. The first token, I call it the workhorse with ICO. This is the utility token. The utility token gives you access to a service or a product. It's a token which is most widely used for ICOs. The advantage of this token is it can be traded on an exchange officially. Exchanges are limited to trade tokens if they are securities tokens, but utilities tokens, they are mostly okay. The other token is the payment token. The payment token has no counterparty obligation. A payment token is typically something like a Bitcoin or Ethereum, a mean of payment which cannot be exchanged against a service or a product. And then finally, we have the asset token or the securities token. An asset-backed token. We're talking about, for instance, a token which is backed by oil. We have seen that. Or by gold, a stable coin backed by gold. Or securities tokens, which actually have the same functionality as a security, as a bond or an equity, are specially recognized by the Swiss financial market authorities. These kind of tokens, they need in most cases a prospectus when to be released, and also the exchange or the transaction or the transfer of those tokens peer-to-peer need to be in written form. What I'm going to talk today is utility token, which in my view is the most genuine token for a crypto crowdfunding. Now, so what are our clients doing when they are facing the fact that the market is currently low or flat? Some of them go for a private sale, which is actually not a bad thing. They don't even try to offer their tokens publicly. They directly go to private investors and sell those tokens to these private investors. This is possible, has some positive aspects, like you know the customers directly, you save all this marketing money because marketing at ICO currently is expensive, reduce KYC AML costs. This is a big chunk of an ICO, a big part of the expenditures actually for know your customer and AML regulations. And especially if you do an ICO via Switzerland, you have to be very clear, it has to be very clear that no ICO should take place without the KYC or AMC process. Think about Tezos, which is now doing a reverse KYC AML because they didn't do it last year. They raised 250 million. Now they have to go back to their buyers of the tokens and ask them to identify themselves. So this is positive. On the negative side, the liquidity. If I buy a utility token and only 20 people use these tokens, then I don't see really a liquidity. I don't really see a market or network effect as well. Token value increases if the network is increasing. So if the network is really limited, there's no really an increase in value of the token. And then finally, we also have legal restrictions, at least in Switzerland, but in other countries in Europe as well. You are limited to not more than 20 people buying your tokens in a private sale. So this is a possibility, not necessarily the best one. Maybe in combination with an ICO later on, it's possible. The securities token, we talk a lot about STO. STOs are actually a release of tokens which have the same functionality as a bond or an equity. They give you access to a share on the profit, either in form of interest or in form of dividends. A good thing. The problem here is there are currently no exchanges, at least officially, which have the authorization to trade securities tokens. That will soon change. The Swiss Stock Exchange, the Australian Stock Exchange, and the Singapore Stock Exchange have announced that by mid of next year, they will offer the possibility to trade securitized, tokenized securities on decentralized ledger technology platforms. So this is the possible way of funding a project outside of the typical crypto crowdfunding mainstream. The challenge here, it's basically the same thing as an angel investment or a seed investment, only that the tokens or the assets are traded on the blockchain instead of on our platform. Traditional early stage funding, some of our clients, they turn their back against crypto crowdfunding. They say, look, I mean, we go for traditional angel and seed funding. Europe, this is the figures from the Association for Angel and Seed Funding in Europe. Last year, around 11-12 billion have been invested in this type of funding. So there is a market here. However, obviously, quite challenging to access because we are talking here about investors, smart investors, and not just people who are buying tokens in the hope that the token will appreciate in value. Now, let's talk about a fourth option, which we have seen now recently with many of our clients. And we call that hybrid financing. So if you look at the balance sheet here of a typical ICO company, you have on the left side, you have the assets. Usually after an ICO, those are actually the funds which have been raised in forms of ETHs or fiat or Bitcoin. On the right side, you see the liabilities, and a small portion is actually the equity. Why is equity still here on such an ICO project? Many ICOs have the legal form of a stock company or an LLC. So there is a minimum capital investment necessary in forms of equity. So these companies, they have shareholders, but the majority of the funding comes from the release of a utility token. The problem with this setup is the following. There is actually no external smart money which comes into this project, so no external supervision of the management and of good governments. This makes those projects quite volatile, since actually the issuers of those tokens are also the main shareholders. And that's also actually one of the reasons why we see so many frauds or ICOs which have failed, because people who are releasing those tokens, they maybe run away, or they just stop their activities because they have overpromised and don't know what to do with the money they have collected. There's another form of legal entity which is quite often used. It's actually the foundation. It's a little bit closer to the idea of a crowdfunding. There are no shareholders there. Or then in extreme form, it's a DAO, the decentralized autonomous organization, which has actually no legal, there's no legal representation currently for such an organization form. Now, what our clients have now tried to do in the recent last weeks is actually they are trying to onboard equity investors. Equity investors which are actually helping them to fund the ICO or assisting them in the management of the companies. And this is a new form which we believe going forward will be interesting for the for the further development of this crypto crowdfunding scene. What are the cornerstones of such an equity investment? Equity investment can take place at various stages, either at the beginning, quite with the ICO, or then later on. There are, however, certain conflict of interest. I will come back on that. The valuation of a company which is selling stocks is quite difficult. How do you evaluate the company which has tokens released or is planning to release tokens? And then on the other hand, there are different models of compensation or of bringing together stockholder interests and token holder interests. The investment stage. Currently, we see mainly the fact that equity holders are trying to be let's say the organizers of a project are trying to onboard equity investment right at the beginning of the ICO. They want to do that in parallel. They want to launch the ICO, and at the same time they want to onboard equity investors, which is a way of funding, especially the high costs of the ICO. Currently, the cost of an ICO in Switzerland, only for legal KYC and AML, are around 200,000, which is quite substantial. And this does not count in the expensive marketing costs. We have other projects. That's also quite interesting. Projects which have been around for quite some time, which are actually profitable, which have a positive cash flow and profitable. And they are launching now an ICO. They want to capture the crowdfunding part of their business. And they can do that better with the release of a utility token. So we see two models. One is during right at the beginning of the ICO, bring in equity investors, and the other one is after the project has been launched successfully through equity and angel investment, launching an ICO later on. The valuation is an issue. A typical valuation approach, such as the discounted cash flow method or the multiples method, do not directly apply for companies which are planning to launch an ICO or have already planned an ICO. Why is that? How do you evaluate the fact that millions of tokens out there which gives access to a service or to a product? We need new models for that. Or how do you evaluate the fact that there is actually a network effect built in, and there is crowd support, that people are actually trying to earn tokens or to spend tokens. That's actually one of the essential parts of a utility token ICO, that one can use the tokens which were bought during an ICO, but also can earn tokens and reuse them. These are very complex valuation problems. Another challenge is actually the shareholder token, the conflict of interest. Token holders have other interests than shareholders. Token holders want an increased network, an increased support for their services, while the shareholders, they want to have a return on investment and an increase on shareholder value. Where they find together is when the shareholders and the token holders want to see a positive growth of the network, of the ecosystem. Here, the shareholder and token holder interests are aligned. Now we have 4 different models which we see currently in the market. Or let's say we see the first model in the market. This is the release of a simple share. Ordinary shares are sold to investors, and what do they get in return for that? They get profit participation, they get ownership, and and it's easily to set up. This is the simplest model, and that's what we see currently in the market, a release of a simple share. Then we have another possibilities which would make probably sense in certain cases. Shares are not compensated through dividends in cash, but through tokens. That would make sure that the interests of the shareholders and the token holders are better aligned. Another option which is quite interesting is actually a convertible share into token. One has to imagine that if a company is being funded by private equity seed money, the investors are facing the illiquidity of the market. It's not difficult, not easy to sell those shares. So a model where you actually can transfer or convert shares into tokens might increase the liquidity, since the tokens in theory at least should be traded on an exchange. This is similar to a share buyback. And then finally, the last model, which is also quite attractive, or could be quite attractive to say so, is actually the convertible of a token into a share. Token holders could have the possibility to actually convert their tokens into the share. But here the question is about how is the ratio between shares and token. Ratio equity investment token, that's also a question we are facing currently with our clients. They're asking us, how many equity should be raised in relation to the shares, to utility or token funding. Here, one has to think about what is more important. Does the project needs, management support by angel investors or venture capitalists? Do they have access to venture capitalists or management or angel money? On the other hand, utility tokens, if the project is clearly focusing towards a network effect, towards crowd support, then it probably makes sense to have more utility token. But this question has not been answered finally. Now, summary. Hybrid funding, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is that the future of ICO? We believe, yes, there are different advantages which can be combined to a hybrid equity token funding. Early stage investment can be funded through an equity investor. Or if you go on a late stage, the equity investor can benefit from a network effect. So those are 2 different times when the equity investor is coming in, but with different advantages. It can be a mix between smart money and smart investors versus crowd support, which is unique, which actually helps to grow the project. There's the possibility, as I have shown with the convertible share to token, of increased liquidity for the equity investors. And on the other hand, if you have the token investment, it's still possible for small investors, not professional investors, to take part at a startup company with a lot of potential. On the other hand, the negative point, valuation is difficult. There's a ratio between equity and shareholders and token holders has to be well defined and well thought through. The mitigation of a possible conflict of interest, something which has to be taken into consideration. And then finally, regulatory questions, legal questions. especially the legal form of the company has to be well analyzed. Well, with that, those are my contacts. I'm around during the rest of the day. Is there some time for questions or?
One question, if any. Any question? Well, I guess they'll reach out to you during the networking sessions. Andre, thank you so much. A big round of applause for this insightful talk.